Thank you, future me and Jason. By the way, I love your show. You do great work. Now, let's take a look around an estate house. I thought it'd be a good idea to sort of take a peek back through time. We'll have a look around this house and we'll talk a little bit about it, what it's got and how do we use a building like an estate house in our games? Because if you're anything like me, I will put one of these buildings in a game and I will struggle to think of all the rooms it should even have, let alone who staffs it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I thought we'd take a little look around one of these houses first to get some ideas and some inspiration. Now, this particular house has quite an interesting backstory, and it's one that immediately makes me think, well, if we've got an estate house in our games, why was that house built? Because this house wasn't a family home. Well, not when it was first built anyway. It was built by a guy called Lord Christopher Hatton, and he was once the treasurer, the chancellor, that's it, of Great Britain. And he built this house not to live in, because he lived somewhere else in actually a larger house, but that larger house wasn't as grand and as fancy as this. This house was built with one purpose in mind. Back then, the Queen used to tour the country every year visiting different stately homes, different homeowners, and he built this house to attract the Queen to come and visit it. And when it was built in its heyday, it was stunning. Not the largest house in Britain, but architecturally, it had all the latest fashions and trends. The gardens here used to be the village of Cherbury. There were about 10 houses here in this little village, and he demolished the village to build his garden. It was extravagance at its highest when this building was first built. So let's take a look around and see what we can discover that gives us inspiration for our RPG games.
To get a feel for the rich, you need to be coming up with things that are going on behind these closed doors that they love to be within. I'm sure that you've had various posh, rich, well-to-do NPCs that are in their ivory towers looking down on the commoners in the town and cities that they rule over. Or maybe they're a little bit out in a mansion like this. They're seen as very out of touch and maybe very separate, but what actually goes on within the families? Have you ever thought about putting tension into these families? How about somebody that is due an inheritance, but actually somebody else wants it? What sort of friends would the Earl greet from the balcony, or what sorts of enemies would he try right in front of him? These sorts of tensions, whether major or minor, will of course as well have some kind of direct or indirect effect on the people out there, the commoners. What if you suddenly have to pick a side because of tensions going on within families?
There are castles that only contain a single great hall. The sum total of the castle is one room that serves every function of the household. But an estate like this has multiple rooms, floors and galleries and entire wings of the house where a visitor could be received and even be resident for a time. This property has two halls. A great hall, which I'm in right now, with its balcony above for the owners of the house to look down upon those being entertained, and a lesser hall, just in case they needed to put two functions on at once. The room I'm in now has a fantastic view of the landscape, but a building this size has so many rooms. The owners and the people who built it had to invent reasons for them. This sizable room I'm in now, which could fit the entirety of the downstairs of my house, is for the purpose of playing billiards. You know, the kind of pool table thing, but billiards. It's gigantic. The room I'm in now is almost the same size as the billiards room, and it's quite interesting to me because it requires an architectural alteration. It has the addition of two large windows to increase the light. That is because this is the library room. And if you're going to be reading books, you need to make as much use of external daylight as you can, because the only other light source in this entire place is the burning of candles and fireplaces.
The room I'm in now is completely linked to the lobby and the master bedroom through there. We're now on the first floor of the building. It also directly mirrors the library and the billiard room down below. It's interesting to show this mirroring as you go up the floors, as if, everything is laid out directly for purpose. But then this part of the room, it's got these columns that were put in a bit later by one of the descendants of Hatton himself. They are hollow, they are wooden, they are specifically just for fashion more than anything. But the ceiling was also raised up to accommodate them in the first place.
I'm overlooking the outer courtyard from this bedroom area on the ground floor of the West Lodgings. There are 4 bedrooms on the west side of the inner courtyard, which is just through that door there. As we go down these lodgings, I count 4 fireplaces, meaning there are 4 bedrooms here on the west side of the building, all on the ground floor. Above me was a gallery that overlooked the courtyard with grand windows and fireplaces of its own. The other side of the courtyard was much the same, more lodgings. This place had a large number of bedrooms. It could take quite a substantial household. Because Kirby Hall is quite a small estate house, this is one of 5 stairwells, not as many as some of the other palaces around Britain. Now, this is the lodging on the other side of the inner courtyard, and over the other side we saw 4 fireplaces, and we have the same pattern down the length of these lodgings. But over here we can clearly see that this extra chimney was built to provide even more fireplaces. That's not because this side of the house is colder, it's because more bedrooms were fitted into this side of the building. There are a lot more rooms on this side.
Down there are remnants of the old cellar, which of course would keep wines, other foodstuffs in, etc. And there is a door that leads to the rather extravagant kitchens, mostly in ruin now, but we're going to take a more closer look at them nonetheless. Travelling from the very top all the way down to where I'm standing is one of the biggest chimney shafts I've seen in this place so far. But what's even cooler about this part, because we're in the kitchens, not only is this an absolutely huge fireplace where they probably keep your pig or your mutton on the roast, there's also a little bread oven. It's so cute, and it's got its own little vent to then go off into the smoke with the rest of it. And now we go into the main part of the kitchen area, past all the lower rooms and the western gallery. There's definitely remnants remaining of huge oven sites. You've got that one there with a little chimney going on. You've got these larger ones. No sign of that rather famous RPG trope, the dumbwaiter, though. Maybe it got lost in the ruins altogether.
I am in the lower hall, a smaller room, but just as high ceilings and just as grand as the Great Hall. This room is much closer to the kitchen, so it's likely the family would have spent some time here when not entertaining. As we head towards the kitchens, this would have once been a great stone staircase, what is currently now made of wood, and there's a very grand arch here. I can only imagine now what the purpose of these rooms were. Nobody really knows anymore. It's fallen to ruin here. So archaeology doesn't really happen up in the sky. But up high isn't the only archaeology. This particular estate house also goes down. And as we venture down into what can only be described as a dungeon, you'll notice whoever gets to spend time here does get a window looking out as the ground comes downhill towards this end of the house, but they also get a fireplace. Because we're underground, all of the architectural shaping here has to be in arches. That's evident both on this window, but also in the roof or ceiling of this little dungeon. If it was any other such shape, the weight of the building would collapse in on itself, and I'd currently be the victim of what would feel like an earthquake. The last time I was at this particular estate house was it's a good 20 odd years ago now, and it was the largest reenactment I'd ever done. I used to be a Viking Age reenactor, and I was in this field that I'm stood in right now in the biggest battle I'd ever taken part in. There were about 600 aside in this battle. It was over twice the size of anything else I'd ever done. We do this thing back then where the two battle lines would meet a couple of times, and on the third time we clashed, we'd start taking hits and we'd fight competitively. Now, I was pretty good back in the day. I practiced and trained regularly to make sure that I was, good on the field. But in this particular battle, I fell victim to a small plague, a bit like a Martian from Wars of the Worlds. I suffered hay fever. And the moment the two lines clashed, I sneezed, and I sneezed, and I sneezed, and I sneezed again. And of course, I was easy prey. I was so busy going, achoo! I wasn't defending or attacking. I died in the first second of the battle. I then spent 20 minutes in front of about 20,000 spectators as a sneezing corpse. Really wasn't my best ever acting. So luckily today I seem to have gotten away with it. So that's it. I hope you've liked our tour of estate houses, and I hope that gives some ideas for your game. So that's it from me from the past, 1 week ago, filming this. I'm going to hand back now to myself in the future, accompanied by Jayson. So take it away, future me and Jayson.